So welcome back to the second case for this week of Faith Moon Friday. In today's case, first we're going to be going to Florida because, can't have a murder channel without a couple Florida cases. And so this case was actually said to have been very infamous during this time period. Of course, this was 1999, so 2 years before I was even born. So of course, can't really say what I remember about the case, if really anything. And so,
but if I lay down and I play dead and I stay dead, baby, you'll get sick of being the monster out of my head, under my bed. Think you're something out of my nightmares, standing right there. But if I lay down and I play dead and I stay dead, then will you get bored of killing me?
So with every other story, I'll tell you the story, and then I guess I'll tell you. And I guess y'all will leave y'all input down below if you have any. And so let's just go and get started. So we'll start off with our first killer because we actually have technically three. We're gonna start with our main player. Kristel Maestas was born on March 11th, 1982. Apparently when she was 17 years old, she would get kicked out of her parents' house for being rebellious. She couldn't go live with her boyfriend, Ronald Bell Jr., because he was still a teenager. So obviously he's still living with his parents. And obviously the parents didn't agree with this. And so Ronald Bell Jr., who was also important to the story, he was born on April Fool's Day, also in 1982. And so, at least that's what sources say. His father was actually a preacher, so that's probably the reason why he didn't want the girlfriend living, because there'd be temptation for premarital sex and stuff. So because his father was a preacher, Ronald Jr. was obviously very active in the church, which is one of the reasons why, because him being a preacher's child, it makes the crime that he helped commit that much more shocking. So of course, Kristel, she needed a place to go. So then of course she apparently responds to a Craigslist ad, because apparently the ad that she saw was apparently a Craigslist ad. And this is where she meets Cordell Richards, who is also an important member of the story. Cordell Richards was apparently born on February 26, 1967. He was raised by his mother. After graduating high school, he would go into the Air Force, and he served in the Gulf War in 1991 and 1992. Sometime after leaving the military, he had gotten married, had a daughter. They got divorced, and the ex-wife wound up getting custody of the child. And so at the time he meets Kristel, he was living in this apartment by himself, needed a roommate. Apparently there was an extra bedroom. And so that's where Kristel moves in, because of course she's desperate, she needs a place to stay. And so it is said that Cordell, which is never verified, but apparently Cordell had made unwanted advances towards her. And so, of course, her being a minor and also her dating Ronald, she, of course, obviously was saying no. And so it got to the point where, allegedly, he had pushed her against the wall and there were bruises on her back. So then, of course, she told her boyfriend Ronald, and then he gave her a baseball bat for protection. One night, she would have a friend named Renee Lynx over. Renee was born on March 31st, 1983. So she was 15 when this happened, just to make it easy for you. She was 15, Ronald was 17, Kristel was technically 16. And so then of course, Cordell had allegedly asked Renee and Kristel both for sex. They obviously felt uncomfortable, so then of course, if this was legitimate, they obviously called someone to get out of the situation. So they called Ronald, because Ronald is dating Kristel. And so they go sleep somewhere else for the night. On the night of February 3rd, 1999, it is said that Kristel and Renee had actually tried to seduce Cordell in order to get his trust. And then once it seemed like they could have his trust, that's when Ronald would come behind and attack him. Because obviously with Cordell being a military man, he's obviously going to be able to fight off if he's expecting it. But if he's caught off guard, it's more than likely you have a better chance of winning versus if he knows you're going to attack him, if that makes sense. So apparently Ronald had bought rope with him. So not just a bat, but also some rope. And he tells Renee to go get the rope, which she does. They tie him up and put him in a blanket. They take him to a wooded forest and tie him up to a tree. They then torture him within the next 8 to 10 hours. He was tortured. Of course, the torture obviously involved a baseball bat. And so I guess Renee and Kristel weren't hitting him hard enough. And so the story goes that Ronald grabs the bat and refers to himself as Babe Ruth. Which obviously Babe Ruth, that's the famous baseball player, and proceeds to hit Cordell as hard as possible. Ronald came back to the crime scene the next day because she was like, there's no way Cordell's still alive, considering the damage we did to him. And he technically was supposed to die, but he was somehow still alive. And there was a construction crew nearby, so they were scared that construction guys are gonna see him, and then he's gonna like live to tell a story, and then we're all going down. And so they go buy a meat cleaver. One source said Target, because Target did exist at the time, but another source said just a regular old supermarket. So they buy a meat cleaver from somewhere. They come back, they slit his throat with said meat cleaver, and that is what his official cause of death was the meat cleaver. They wipe the meat cleaver clean, and then they return it back the next day. I don't know if it was the next day, but they eventually return it back. It sells like $9.99. I don't know if that's plus tax or including tax, but like they wanted they $10 back. And so apparently Kristel would actually bring her younger sister, who apparently was like 15, and her name was like April, to the body. For what reason, I don't know. I guess Renee has some sort of remorse because she told her mother, like, hey, like I kind of saw a murder, and the mom was like, basically like, keep your mouth shut so as not to put yourself in it. So I guess, I don't know if she didn't want her daughter like going to jail, or she was scared her daughter was gonna get like murdered because since she saw a murder. It never said. Apparently his daughter's birthday was coming up, like her 4th birthday, because when his daughter's 4th birthday arrived and he like never showed up, he was reported missing by Ruby. Ruby is the ex-wife of Cordell, by the way, and the mother of this child. Police would go to the apartment, I guess, for a welfare check, and they would find Ronald and Kristel. They claimed to not know where exactly Ronald was. Police would go and find his bike there, which they thought was a red flag, because he did have a car at one point, but apparently it was said that he got into a wreck. And so, of course, him having this wreck, he obviously can't use his car. So he got his bike to go around everywhere. So if he really went somewhere, he would have took his bike with him. So for his bike to still be there, it's a little suspicious. And so on March 4th, 1999, so about a month after the actual murder, a 12-year-old boy would sadly find the body of Cordell. By the time it was like legally like revealed the body had been discovered, the couple was nowhere to be found. By a stroke of luck, Kristel and Donald would actually get stopped by the police while they were on their way to the apartment, because there was a vehicle matching the description of a vehicle that was around Cordell's house around the time he went missing. And so, however, it was like 3 people inside at the time, so it's believed that it was it was Ronald, Kristel, and Renee in the car. So then, of course, the two deny any involvement. Somehow, Kristel's family would convince her to tell the truth. So then, of course, Kristel says that Cordell made moves with her, which, again, was never confirmed. Kristel's younger sister, April, who was 15, she got 5 months in jail for accessory to murder, because I guess like she didn't report the murder happening. But her charges were dropped due to a witness taking back their story. So April's free now. And so Renee would testify in exchange for a lighter sentence. She got 15 years, but only served 12, so I guess she got on good behavior. Ronald Jr. was said to supposed to got the death penalty, but in 2003 he got life due to him being 17, so he was still a minor, because apparently minors were not eligible for a death penalty. Of course, Kristel would get life, of course, since it seemed like she was the ringleader of the whole thing. In 2012, the U.S. Supreme Court actually made life sentences for minors unconstitutional. So, of course, this would grant Ronald and Kristel a new trial, because they were minors at the time this happened. They were sentenced to life, so they were trying to figure out, can we get a lighter sentence? So then, of course, they were both re-sentenced to life. Around this time, of course, Renee is released, so, she's living her best life right now. So she's been out since 2012. So what, like 11 years now. And so, yeah, so Ronald and Kristel are still in jail. Renee's out, presumably living her best life. And, yeah, that was the case of the murder of Cordell Richards. I hope you liked my take on it. Let me know your thoughts down below as to like what exactly what you think the murder motive was. And I'll see you faithfulness with the next one. Bye.
So if I play dead, will you regret everything that you did, that you said? I don't think you understand what you're doing, and my heart's black and blue from the bruising. I feel like when I'm with you I'm losing. I feel like you think that this amusing, sitting there gaslighting and confusing. Was it me? Is it me? Am I deluded? I'm the one who's always sorry, the conclusion. Even though I offer all of the solutions, I wish you loved me like I love you.